Thanks. You can be seated. We are continuing our series on parenting, and we have been talking about God the Father as a parent in the Old Testament, particularly in the story of the Garden of Eden. This morning, I want to look at a story that Jesus tells. Charles Dickens calls this the finest story ever told. You will know it as the story of the prodigal son. But a couple of observations. The Bible never calls him a prodigal. Secondly, I don't really think the focus is the prodigal son. I think the focus is the loving father. And we're going to see that this morning. As we talk about this story, it's familiar to us. And so sometimes when we're dealing with that which is familiar, we tend to miss sometimes some of the most obvious and some of the most important things. So this morning we're going to kind of walk through that. Let me set you a background of the culture of the time so you understand some things about the culture. In the culture that this story is told, when a father dies, the responsibility of the family moves to the firstborn male child. Because of that, the firstborn male child received a double portion of the inheritance. So here's what that would mean. So in my family, I have two boys, JT and Josh. JT's the oldest. If I were to die, and we were in the Bible times, what would happen is you would take my estate. It would not go to my wife. It would then be divided into thirds. JT would get 2/3, Josh would get 1/3. JT now has the responsibility to take care of the family, i.e. including my wife. So now everything moves and shifts to him because he's the oldest male in the family. He then gets a double portion, if you will, of the inheritance. Josh would get 1/3. Jean's care then would be taken care of by JT. Yeah, everybody's going, Jean's going, thank God we don't live in the Old Testament time. No, he would do fine. He actually, it is true, because when I go out of town, my last text is, okay, I'm leaving town now, take care of your mom, and both of them come back and don't worry, we will, and they both check on her, so I'm not worried about that. They both would just do fine. But in the Old Testament and the New Testament time, this is the way it worked, okay? So you need to understand that as we read the story, all right? So it would not happen, though, until I die. All right? The key to this story here is that Dad would have to die for this to go into effect. So this is the story that Jesus tells, and here's what he says. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Here's what's amazing. So the father divided his property between them. So he gave the oldest one the 2/3. He gave the youngest one 1/3. Now, not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went, and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, at this point, if you're listening to Jesus' story, there is no worse job for a Jewish person in the planet than this. So at this point, they would have gone, oh, no. And it said he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This is what he's talking about. These are carob pots. These are prevalent in the place that Jesus is telling the story. In other words, let's make sure we understand the story at this point. As he's going out to the field with a bucket of these, he's looking at it going, I would give anything to be able to eat that. but this is for the pigs. I can't even have this as my 5-star meal tonight. This is where he is. Now, does that look, anybody want to go home to a plate of those? He's actually desiring this to eat. This is how bad it is, right? Going on. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out, I will go back to my father, I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. This doesn't happen. Elderly Jewish fathers do not run. This is a, how do I want to say this? They were respected, they were honored, they were revered. They did not run. That was something that children did, not mature Jewish fathers. It says he ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. Remember, he smells like pigs. He's been living with pigs. He stinks to high heaven. And then he said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe, put it on his rotten, stinky body. It doesn't say that, but that's my version. Put it on him. Put a ring on his fingers. Put sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this my son of mine was dead. He's alive. He was lost. He's found. And they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and he asked him what was going on. And he said, your brother has come. He replied, and your father's killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. And the older brother became angry. And he refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. I never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat to celebrate with my friends. When a son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. My son, the father said, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and he's alive again. He was lost. Now he's found. This story, I think, is packed full of lessons, not just for us as parents, but for us as people. So let's walk through just some observations, and then we'll get to three important lessons, I think. So the first thing is this. Let's talk about the son for a minute, the younger son. What's interesting in the story is the sense of entitlement this kid has. Now, technically, and we're going to talk about this, both sons have a sense of entitlement. But the younger son has a sense of entitlement because basically what he's doing is he's saying, look, Dad, I really want you dead. And since I really don't want to kill you, how about just giving me my inheritance now? Let's take all the stuff and divide it up and give me my portion now, Dad. Hey, yeah, you're my dad and all of that, but I just want my money so I can go. Because, Dad, look, I don't like your rules. I don't like the way you do things around here. I want to go do my own thing. But I can't do my own thing because I don't have any money because you haven't died. So rather than you dying, just give me my money so I can go. What's amazing to me is Dad says, okay. Dad basically looks at him and says, all right, we'll do that. And he lets this kid go. And when this kid goes, he blows it. He parties with no rules and no regulations and runs his own life, and he's having a grand old time. And then difficulty comes, and famine comes to the land, and all of his friends are not going to help him out anymore. And he's by himself, and he's got to figure out a way now to make a living, to be able to have money to eat. And the only job he can come up with is basically a pig farmer. And he's desperate enough to do that. He finally hits bottom, and when he's at the bottom, he comes to this fascinating realization that he may not have liked Dad's rules and the way Dad did stuff, but you know what? Even Dad's servants live better than what I'm living right now. So why not go back and ask for a job? Because Dad's servants get treated better than I'm being treated here. And he says, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell Dad that I messed up. I need a job. I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven. What I did was wrong, and I want to come back, Dad, and work for you. That's interesting because then we're introduced to the Father, and there's a bunch of things here that are interesting and unique about Dad. One, it says that when Dad sees him afar off, because I think as the son is walking, his head is down. He's realizing he's really blown it. So he's coming back in incredible humility to Dad. It's interesting that the text says that Dad is the one who sees him first, and Dad sees him afar off. Now, if you look at the culture in the time, the way the houses were set up, what it means is that Dad had to go outside of the compound. I don't know if Dad was out checking the animals. I don't know if Dad was out taking a stroll. I don't know if Dad every day went and looked for his son to come over the hill one day, but at one point, he recognizes off in a distance that's his kid. And he does something what no Jewish father would ever do. He takes his robes and he would wad them up and he would tuck them into his belt and he takes off running to go meet his kid. It was not something that an honorable person would do. It's not something that an aged father would do. But he doesn't care what anybody else thinks. He's going to see his kid. And he makes a beeline for his kid. And rather than looking at his kid and waiting till he cleans himself up, waiting till he's on, he comes in and he wraps his arms around him and he starts kissing him. And listen, this guy would have reeked. He's living in poverty. He smells. He stinks. There's nothing about him that probably even looks like, the last time he saw his kid was probably walking out with his fancy robes and his fancy shoes and his fancy stuff. And now he's coming back in tattered clothes and he's standing there and Dad wraps his arms around him. And in humility, he says, Dad, I messed up. And Dad, I don't expect you to do anything. Just, would you give me a job? And Dad says, you know what? My son is here. And he says, go and get him a nice robe. So they immediately get him a decent set of clothes. They put a ring on his finger, which was a sign of authority and a sign of linking him to the family. They give him sandals. He puts them on, and then he says, let's go have a party. He takes the fatted calf, and in this culture, what would happen is you always had that special animal that you set aside for something really big. And that animal was set aside for that. That animal, everybody in the family knew that animal is going to be, it's kind of like in the old days, before me. In the old days, you would have a turkey maybe that you would raise and you would say, that's the Thanksgiving turkey. We got that turkey set aside for Thanksgiving or for Christmas. That turkey, nobody, we don't sell that one. We're not going to eat that one yet. We're saving that one. Dad says, go get the fatted calf. Go get that special animal we've set aside. Kill it. Now listen, you've got to understand, in this culture, there's no refrigeration, okay? There's no take-home boxes, okay? You eat what's there. If you're going to kill a calf, a large animal, you had better have lots of people there. You had better have a long party because you've got to pretty much eat it till it's gone. Can you imagine inviting me over and saying, hey, PJ, we got a couple of people coming over. We got half a beef we're having this afternoon. We got to eat it all. This is a whole beef. Okay, you getting the picture here? This is like me saying, hey, come on over. I've ordered 100 pizzas and we're going to eat them all this afternoon. And we got to have a big group to consume that amount of food. So when he does this, he's pulling out all the stops. And they're having this great big party, and there's music, and there's dance, and everything else. And the older boy, he comes walking up. He's hearing this noise. He comes up over the hill, looks at the servant and says, what's going on? Oh, you haven't heard? Your brother's home. Okay, so what? So Dad killed the fatted calf. Dad did what? Dad killed the fatted calf. He's having a party. He's brought in musicians and everybody's singing and everybody's happy and your brother is home. And the text says he comes to the door and stops. And he will not go in. He's having his very own pity party. And he's the only one there. And he won't go in the door. He will not enter the door. Somebody says, hey, your older son's out there, Dad. And here's what's fascinating. Dad then leaves the party, this is important, to go out to talk to the older son. He said, what's wrong? He said, you're having a party. Yeah, I know we're having a party. Come on in. No, you're having a party for that kid that took all your money and wasted it. He said, yeah, come on in. Join us. No, you don't understand, Dad. He took everything that you had worked hard for. He wasted it. I have worked like a dog keeping this farm running. I have done everything. I ended up having to do his job too while he was gone. You never so much as even took a little goat and let me and my friends go out and have a bonfire out back and enjoy it because I've been such a good son. And now you're having a party for him? How dare you, Dad? It's fascinating to me. You know what Dad does? He looks at him and says, son, all this stuff, it's yours. You wanted to kill a goat with your friends and go have a bonfire? You should have done it. I'm not stopping you from doing that. But here's what I do know. My son, whom I love, just like I love you, was dead and now he's alive. He was lost, now he is found. I'm having a party. Come on in and join us. And he goes back inside. And the story, as far as we know, the story ends with brother standing outside with his little pity party. Now, in context, big context, there's a reason Jesus tells this story, and there's all kinds of implications for it. One of the implications, the main implication is this. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and Sadducees, who were all upset because Jesus was hanging with the wrong people. And Jesus, in essence, is looking at them going, guys, you're like the older brother. And I'm in here celebrating the fact that my kingdom's come to heaven. We're going to celebrate that while I'm here. You can either be a part of it or you cannot. It's your call. That's the big picture. Okay? The little picture, the implication picture, I think, for us, is a ton of lessons. So let's run through them. Let's talk about lessons for all of us. Well, let me go back. Let me back it up a little bit. I think there's a lesson for us as parents, too. One of the things that I'm amazed in this story is that Dad lets him go. And do you understand the amount of parental pressure he would have faced? What? You gave away your inheritance before you died? What? You don't know where your kid is? Oh, your kid's doing that. Hey, I heard your kid went to another country, apparently got away from Dad far enough, but I'm sure the rumors came back. There's been incredible parental pressure on Dad because of the way he handled this situation. How dare you give away your inheritance before you die? But Dad wasn't worried about that. You know what? Look, if you haven't figured this out, moms and dads, yet, there's an incredible amount of parental pressure today. You remember how you thought when you were in high school that peer pressure is so hard, I can't wait till I get out of high school and there's no more peer pressure? And then you became a parent. Oh, you don't do that? Oh, well, we do this. Oh, you don't have that for your child? Well, we have this for our child. What? What do you mean? Your child's 4 and they don't have a cell phone? You've got to be kidding me. What? They don't have a tablet? What? They don't have an Xbox? What? They don't have this? They don't have that? And all there's this parental parent. How dare you do that with your kids? We would never have done that when we were parents. And you face all this kind of crazy parental pressure, moms and dads. Dad, he would have faced that. As a parent, he would have faced that. But one of the things that amazes me is that he incredibly is dedicated to loving both of his kids. As far as the way he handles them. He doesn't, one of the things is he lets them go. The other thing is he doesn't pursue them. I think that's interesting in this story. He waits for the younger son to come back on his terms, not the kid's terms, but on Dad's terms. And Dad doesn't go out and bring the party out to the older son. He explains to the older son, the party's inside and you're more than welcome to come in. But we are not coming out for you just because you've got a burr under your saddle. And so Dad's pretty firm in the way that he handles stuff like this with the kids. I think a couple of lessons for us individually. I think a lesson for everybody sitting here today. One of the things that you see in this passage is the sense of entitlement these two kids have. The younger one to the point of saying, Dad, look, you give me what's mine now. There is within this thing this sense of I am owed this. Even the older son, you never threw me a party like you threw him a party. There's a sense of entitlement in the story that Dad has to deal with. You want to know what I see in our culture right now? I see this huge sense of entitlement. And if you'll think about it for a second, you can understand how we got here, because what happened was, one of the big players in this was this idea of this individualism kind of mentality that is prevalent in our culture. We now have come to a point in our culture where the individual is the focus. Even in our educational system, what's happened in our educational system? We have individualized learning plans for these children. In other words, we're going to tailor everything for them to learn around them and the way that they are designed. Wasn't the way it used to be, but that's the way it is now. Now we have people who start focusing on them as individuals. And so what has happened is, this is what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement. What happened? We focused on us individuals, individually black people, and how they were being marginalized in society. And then once they got their voice going, then everybody else jumped in. Well, white lives matter too. What about our individualism? And then Chinese lives matter, and Japanese lives matter, and Vietnamese lives matter, and Indian lives matter. And so we have all of these groups now vying for see us special. And then we have the whole LGBTQ thing, where you have to see us special now because our individual needs need to be. So society needs to cater to us and meet our individual needs. And it's snowballing, if you haven't figured that out yet. And it's only going to get worse. Hate to not encourage you. Because when you have a society that starts looking at its individual needs and individualizing something, what happens is you develop a society that feels entitled. And that's exactly where we are. And we have started to then want everything geared around us. It's about us. It's about me. It's about my individual needs and my individuality. So now we're to the point that you have to see me the way I see me. So you need to use my preferred pronouns because I see myself this way, and you have to see me the way I see me. Because it's all about me. It's a narcissistic society that has developed itself all around itself. And you know what happens when that starts to develop and get at the core of a society? You have a society, ultimately, that starts feeling entitled to everything. What? You have more money than me? I'm entitled to a portion of that. What? What do you mean? You have to use my pronouns for me. You have to do this for me. Here's a question for you. When a whole society is focused on what it can get for itself, what does that do to a service industry like firefighters, policemen, nurses, CNAs, people in service kind of industries? They don't exist anymore. That's the future that awaits us if we don't change it. Why? Because we, like the older son and the younger son, have individualized everything around us. And by the way, as you sit here and go, yeah, you talk about those, that Black Lives Matter people and that LGBTQ thing and da-da-da. Whoa. We do the same thing in Christianity. And that's what's happened in Christianity right now. We now have a Christianity that is focused on what it gets from God, not what God wants from it. So now we have worship songs that make us feel fluffy and happy. And all of those songs are not about the God of heaven who sits in heaven as creator and authority. They're all about what that God can do for me because he's my genie in a bottle. He's the God who I just say, okay, God, you promised me this, so you give me this. God, I want my best life now. Give me my best life now, God. That's what you owe me. You came to this earth to give me my best life. Excuse me? Who do we think we are? What do you mean, God? I'm going through this difficult time right now and health-wise. Don't you understand, God, that I have to be healed now, right now, because you owe it to me? Really? What do you mean, God? What do you mean I have to struggle? What do you mean I have to deal with pain? What do you mean I have to deal with hardship? What do you mean this came into my life? Why are you doing this to me, God? It's not fair. I should have a better life, God. Really? How is that different from the older son and the younger son in this story? Where we have this sense of entitlement that God owes us. And when Jesus is on the earth, what does he ask us to sign up for? If any man will come after me, deny himself. It ain't about you. Take up your cross. It's going to be hard and difficult and will probably end in your death. And follow me. Come on, here's the sign-up sheet. And we have a world out there that says, no, come and follow Jesus and everything will turn into bubbles and roses and rainbows because God is in heaven for you. Really? He came to the cross because he loved me and he cared about me. But my Christianity is not about what he will do for me. It's about what I can do to serve him. And we've got to get that across. My life, I gave him a blank check. You do with my life whatever you want, God. I'm here for you. You don't exist for me. I exist in order to serve and honor and love you. I think we can do exactly what those two kids do in this story and convince ourselves that we don't. And I think we're making the same mistakes they do. We're not careful. I think there's a lesson in here for parents. This dad loves these kids regardless of which side of the fence they're on here. He loves them unconditionally. He loves his youngest son enough to say, okay, If I'm not dying fast enough, I'll give it to you. I wouldn't have done that, but he did. He loves the older son enough to leave the party to go out and try to convince him to come in. Moms and dads, listen to me. Your kids have to know you love them. Your kids have to know there's nothing you can do that will not make me love you. That doesn't mean I'm going to approve of what you do. It doesn't mean I'm going to like what you do. It doesn't mean that I'm going to subsidize what you do. But I do love you. And I think your kids need to know that they can always come back to you, but on your terms, not theirs. The son did not get to come back. The young son did not get to come back on his terms. He came back willing to be a servant. He came back ready to get a job for dad. The oldest son was more than welcome to come in, but dad was not going to take the party to him. He was not going to go out and say, oh, I don't want you to be upset, so we'll all come out here and we'll have the celebration with you. No, it's like the party's in there. If you want to be a part of it, go join it. That's the way it works here, son. We don't know what happens at the end of this story, but you just need to think about the whole crux of the story. Because what God does, or what the father says to the older son is, look, you have everything. So dad didn't patronize the younger son and say, okay, I'm going to go take back your older brother's inheritance and split it so you have a little more money. No. He would have come back working for dad. And if he wasn't working for dad, he may have been given kind of a sonship kind of role. But at some point, daddy dies. And you know who's in charge now? Older brother. I don't think older brother would have looked at his younger brother and said, I'm going to give you an easy job. I think older brother would have looked at him and said, now that daddy's gone, I'm going to make you so miserable you go work for somebody else because I don't want you here. Now, that's just my sanctified imagination, but I think that's probably what happened. Because see, there's still a price that the younger son has to pay. He doesn't come back and all of a sudden get another inheritance. He has to come back and live with the consequences of his choices. So like I say, I think it's more, you want to set it up so your kids can always come back, but on your terms, not theirs. And I think that's an important part. Because I watch a lot of parents let the kids come back and they let the kids set the terms. I mean, even now, my kids will tell you, when we go over to their house, I kind of have a rule at my house. And my house is, whoever's house it is, prays for the meal. And my kids will tell you, if I'm over at Josh's house or I'm over at JT's house and we're sitting down and we're getting ready to eat, I went, your house, you pray. We're here to do, this is your house. You get to call the rules here. And if I don't like it, I'll leave. Why? Because I think that's the way it should be. I think that's the way that it's set up. And in this story, one of the things that you see is you see this dad who says, I'm going to love my kids no matter what. They are more than welcome to come back, but they're going to have to come back on my terms. Let me say this before I end. There are some of you here that may be like that younger son. And for whatever reason, you've run away from God. You're doing your own thing. You're living with the pigs, and you're pretty miserable. Can I say this to you? This story is about a heavenly Father who, when you decide to come back, will run towards you, wrap his arms around you, kiss you, and treat you like a son. As stinky, smelly, and as messed up as you have made it, it doesn't matter to him. And I want to encourage you to not sit here for a moment and think you can't come back to God. That's the crux of the story, is the fact that he took this kid in. And no matter what you have done, there's nothing that you can do that will make God run away from you. He will always run towards you, this side of the grave. And I just want to encourage you, if you find yourself in that boat, head back to him, because he is there with open arms. So I end this morning for all of us with this idea, with this concept. God as a Father loves us. He's never going to force us to serve him. He will allow us to go our own way. But as his children, that way will never be easy. It'll come at a cost. When he returns, God welcomes us on his terms with love and acceptance. It's my prayer that we learn to parent and to live that way. Let's pray. Lord, help us. Lord, for some who may have run away from you, may they turn around and come back. Lord, for others who may be like the older son, where they think they have all their ducks in a row and they feel like they're entitled to a certain style or type of life from you, Lord, would you break our hearts to help us to realize we are your servants, here to serve you, not us. And Lord, this week, as we try to do that, use us in all of the different ways that you choose to use us this week. And we'll give you the honor and the glory and the praise, these things we ask in your name.